She holds a master's from the American University in Cairo. Welcome, Sama. Our next panelist is grandmother Monopolaka. She's an elder in the tribal lineage of the Havasupai, the Hopi, and the Tewa tribes. She is chair of the International Council and one of the 13 Indigenous grandmothers, who are a group of elders from around the world sharing prayers for healing and peace. Mona is a representative of the Indigenous World Forum on Water and Peace, a coalition of Indigenous leaders and organizations and others who wish to protect water for future generations. This is a vision from the elders that has support of 60 organizations globally and at the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. She is also the president of the Turtle Island Project, a nonprofit program founded in 1986 by Western practitioners and Native American healers to blend the science of mind, body, spirit medicine with Indigenous wisdom and practices. Mona also serves as a member of the World Council of Religious and Spiritual Leaders due to her international justice work. She serves on several United Nations committees on Indigenous peoples' issues and is an educator on Indigenous peoples' human rights, aging, mental health, addiction, and violence. Mona has a Master's of Social Work from the Arizona State University, and we welcome her today. Another of our panelists is Kathleen Porter Mcgee. She is superintendent of Partnership Schools, a nonprofit that manages a network of 9 urban Catholic schools in Harlem, the South Bronx, and Cleveland. She is also the author of a recent Manhattan Institute report entitled Catholic on the Inside, Putting Values Back at the Center of Education Reform. Before the partnership, Kathleen served as the Senior Advisor for Policy and Instruction at the College Board, Director of Curriculum and Professional Development at Achievement First, and Director of Teacher and Principal Professional Development and Recruitment for the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. Kathleen is a Pahara Aspen Education Fellow and is also an Education Fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution. Kathleen began her career as a classroom teacher at both middle and high school levels. She has a bachelor's from the College of the Holy Cross, and her master's in education policy and leadership is from the George Washington University. Welcome, Kathleen. Our moderator today will be Associate Professor Stephanie Barkley of the Notre Dame Law School. Stephanie directs the Notre Dame's Religious Liberty Initiative, which involves promoting religious freedom scholarship, educational events like these, and launching a new religious liberty clinic where law students defend religious liberty for individuals of all faiths by advising clients outside of the courtroom, as well as pursuing claims in the trial courts and appeals up into including the US Supreme Court. Stephanie's research focuses on the role of our different democratic institutions and how they play in protecting minority rights, particularly the intersection of free speech and religious exercise. Her academic writings have been published in publications such as the Harvard Law Review, among many others, and she frequently appears on the national media to discuss First Amendment issues, such as the BBC World News, the Wall Street Journal, and her work has been featured in media outlets such as the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, among others. Stephanie is a fellow at the Notre Institute of Law, Religion, and Ethics at Pepperdine University, and a faculty affiliate at the Constitutional Law Center at Stanford Law School. Prior to joining the Notre Dame faculty in 2020, Stephanie was an associate professor at Brigham Young University. Before becoming a professor, she litigated First Amendment cases full-time at the Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty, and also in private practice in Washington, D.C., where she drafted multiple Supreme Court briefs, including the rights of a Muslim inmate seeking to wear a religious beard. Stephanie serves as the chair of the AALS Law and Religion section. She graduated from BYU Law School, summa cum laude, where she was also elected to the Order of the Coif. Stephanie clerked for the Honorable N. Randy Smith on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. And this coming fall, Stephanie will take a one-year leave to clerk for U.S. Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch. So that's our 5 panel members. And thank you all for listening to me read the bios. So let's get to this important conversation about empowering women. And Stephanie, as our moderator, please take it from here.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you for all of your help volunteering with the Religious Liberty Initiative so far. I hope more of our great alum and other partners and people who care about religious liberty will follow Kate's example and sign up. She's been involved in a lot of fun ways. Thank you especially to our panelists to share their time and their wisdom with us today. I'm really excited to discuss with them this topic of ways in which religious liberty protections are critical to empower women as we celebrate this International Women's History Month. So Mona, I'm going to go ahead and start with you. If you could share with us some of your thoughts about ways in which a woman's ability to practice her faith and her spiritual traditions is often core and critical to her identity and often the community that she's a part of. One particular conflict I'm thinking of that I know you and I have both been involved in is the issue that's going on in Arizona right now with a sacred site to multiple tribes, including Apache members, and that is Oak Flat, an area that is being threatened right now with destruction by mining interests. So speak a little bit to any of those topics that strike you and anything else that you think is worth noting about ways in which religious liberty can empower women. And thank you for joining us today. Oh, and Mona, you are muted.
Always forget that. Okay, so first of all, I'd just like to greet each and every one of you. Gamil, good morning. And I guess it's almost noon for you all. I'm just grateful to be here, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional homelands where I'm speaking to you from. I'm in Tucson, Arizona, the traditional land and territory of the Tohono Nation. And I come from the people of the blue-green water, the Havasupai on my mother's side and Hopi and Tewa on my father's side. And in relation to the topic we're talking about women, even my introduction is based on the importance of the women that I come from. My mother, who is Havasupai, I acknowledge that lineage first. On my father's side, my grandmother, my paternal grandmother is Hopi, and my paternal grandfather is Tewa. And so, and the other thing is that the Havasupai are the people of the water, people of the blue-green water. This waterfall that's behind me is from our homeland down in the canyon. And so I come from this water. And then on my Hopi side, my grandmother, she comes from the Sun Clan. And on my father's side, he comes from the tobacco. And my last name, Polaka, it means butterfly. And so I'm a water woman and I'm a butterfly. So that's my identity. And so this relationship as a woman, an indigenous woman of North America, or what we call Turtle Island, it's based on our feminine connections, as not only we consider the water our mother water because we live in the water. Before we were born, we lived in water in our mother's womb. And so we call it our mother water, and we honor and respect it that way. So, so from the perspective of an indigenous woman, our relationship in life is what we call sacred. And because we also have this understanding that there's a saying which I really like and wanted to share it this morning. It's no people go down until the hearts of the women are on the ground. And so even that saying is also reflective of how important the life of women are. We are the life givers. We are the ones who pass the culture, the teachings, the stories, the foodways, compassion to the future generations. And we also are the ones who teach principles of proper living or proper conduct. That's all part of the foundation that the women establish in their home or with their children. And also, I always, when I talk to women who are Indigenous women who are going to stand up and be the protectors of the water, of the land, or to go in and speak on behalf of the people or the water, I tell them the call to action is that we are like mama bears, and no mama bear will let anyone go into her cave and threaten her children or make a mess of her home. And so this is the these are some of the foundations of what I consider the strength of being women. And also we are the ones who also in many of our tribal cultures originally, the women are acknowledged from the time they're born. Well, actually, so are the men, but women, when they're born, there's a naming that's given to her. She's as a baby newborn introduced to all of the world, all of the elements, the water, the air, the sun, Mother Earth. She's introduced, and then she's introduced to the plant life. She's introduced to all of these elements and her relationship to it as being life. And as she grows, she comes to the stage of life of becoming a young woman. And so it's called the rites of passage. And what's happening at Oak Flats is this land, this place called Oak Flats, which is a San Carlos Apache, as well as other Apache nations, a gathering place. And it's recognized as their holy ground, where they know from time immemorial their consistent relationship and their consistent connection to that place, where they go to and they collect their medicines, they collect their food. Oak trees grow there, and from the oak come the acorn, and that acorn is one of their sacred foods, as well as their medicine. There's a little spring there that they go and they use that water and rely on it as a healing water. and so there's when a young girl becomes has her first menstruation, that's acknowledged. It's acknowledged that she's becoming a woman. And so the Apache people, they have a ceremony called the sunrise ceremony. It's a 4-day ceremony of prayers, of songs, of dance, of special medicines that are given to her, and special instructions are given to her as a woman, becoming a woman. And the men are also involved. They take care of certain things, and she has her mother and all of the different women who are invited to help. They all come and they all camp there, and others are invited, and they come to show support and bear witness to this wonderful event and acknowledge that she is now a woman. And with being a woman comes responsibility. And it starts with that. How are you going to relate to others? It starts with her relationship with all of the elements, all of the plant life, animal life, all of those things, that the things that are part of what we call the divine creations of the Creator, and that she's introduced to that, and they're introduced. She's introduced to them that she's now a woman, and so she's given this beautiful ceremony, and so I've been to Oak Flats. It is a special place. You can feel the energy. There's this vibration that's there, that it touches you, makes you feel, and it's, we say, the spirits are present. We could feel them. We could even see them in the, see them and hear them. Through the wind, the little motions of the air, little whirlwinds that come around the wind. The oak trees are huge. They're very old. And I sat under one, and sitting there, and we're talking with the man who is upholding this effort, the Apache stronghold leader, Wensler Nosey. I sat there with him, talking with him, and we're sitting under this huge oak tree, and looking at the trunk of this tree, and in there I see faces, and I feel their presence, and I'm listening, and it's like they're comforting me, they're comforting us, and they're saying, which is in the elders, when we're together and they talk, there's always, they're saying that, yeah, good, that's right, that's the way it is, So I'm hearing this, and we believe that our ancestors are present. So I could feel and sense that the ancestors were there with us. And it was at that time that I made that commitment, that I am going to do everything I can to support the effort that the Apache stronghold is making to preserve and protect this place, this sacred place, Oak Flats. And what puts me in that position to do that is when I became of age, what my mother told me was, she said, You know, there was a time when the Havasupai, they had these rites of passage ceremony for women, for the young girls. And she said, I'm the last generation of that when they had those ceremonies. When I had my first menstruation, or we call it our moon time, or our grandmother time, because we're related to the moon. The moon is like our great grandmother. And we're in the cycle, we're in her cycle of the 28 days. So we call the moon like our grandmother. And so we call it our moon time when we're on our moon time, when we're on our menstruation. So when that came for me, my mother took me outside and in the morning, early morning, and stood me facing to the east as the sun was rising. And she talked to me and told me, you know, that I was a young woman now. I was becoming a woman. That's what this is, you know, this time. And that there's certain ways you have to take care of yourself now. And then she said to me, she said, you're not in this world for nothing. You have a purpose. You're not here just for yourself. You have a purpose for life. You must take care of your family. Everything you do has a relationship and effect on others, not just you. How you walk, how you talk, what you do has an effect on others. You're not here just for yourself. And there's times when people need help. Your sisters, your brothers, your aunties, your uncles, grandmas, grandpas, your relatives. They're going to need your help. You'll know what to say, what to do. Step forward. Step forward. Say something, speak for them, stand up for them. Your home, your land. Your responsibility isn't just here. It's with your family, your community, your people, our tribe, and then our tribal nations.
Mona, just a quick reminder, about 1 minute to wrap it up. Thank you for these beautiful remarks.
So and then she said, so then it's the world too. And then she said, you're here and you have a relationship with everything here on Mother Earth, but you also have a relationship with what's above us, all the way to the universe. You have a relationship. And when you were born, they all recognized you. And when they recognized you, you take that place in this world to take care of it. That's you. That's what she told me. And so that's why I'm doing what I do. That's why I'm speaking today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mona. That was beautiful. And thank you for this powerful example you were showing of how, as a woman, you are standing up for other women in their time of need and advocating for them. Rachel, I want to go to you next, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about ways in which sometimes when government imposes restrictions dealing with religious liberty, this can have disproportionate impacts on women. So I'm thinking, for example, of some of the recent COVID restrictions we saw that prohibited gatherings above a number of 10 people. And so in New York, for example, what this meant was that women in the Orthodox Jewish community were effectively prohibited from worshiping at all, because the Orthodox Jewish community requires a minyan of 10 men before you can have a religious gathering. And so I doubt that this was a foreseen impact, but the impact was basically a blanket ban on these Orthodox Jewish women in a way that other groups weren't as impacted by. So I'd be interested in your thoughts about that. And also just generally other perspectives that you might have about ways some of these issues come up for women of faith that you see from your vantage point as a reporter.
Sure. Thank you so much. And thank you all for being here. Just a quick bit about me before we dive into the subject matter. I grew up in an Orthodox Jewish community in South Florida. After graduating high school, I spent a year studying sacred texts and religion and Jewish religion in Jerusalem. I then received my bachelor's degree from Yeshiva University, which is an Orthodox Jewish university in New York, and what's called the crown jewel, actually, of modern Orthodoxy. The modern Orthodox ethos kind of takes secular knowledge and religious knowledge and says, live them both. Live as a Jew and also be a doctor and also be an engineer. And that's kind of the orthodoxy that I come from. After that, I spent a year at Columbia Journalism School, where a lot of my coursework did focus on religious journalism and covering religion. After that, I spent a few years covering the intersection of religion and gender, and also the intersection of religion and conflict as a freelance reporter, after ultimately finding my place as an environmental reporter, first at the Weather Channel, and now with Flood Defenders News. As a journalist, before I get into the COVID piece, but as a journalist, I've covered quite a few stories that really look at how religious liberty and freedom of speech rub up against each other. And, as Stephanie mentioned, very often women do get the short end of the stick there. So I'll give you an example that's COVID related. So for Orthodox women, or Orthodox couples, there's a concept called nida, which effectively means a separation period between husband and wife while the woman is menstruating. At the end of the menstruation and then a few days, that period of time ends with the woman immersing in a ritual bath called a mikvah. She dunks either once or 3 times, 7 times, depending on your tradition. And then basically you're good to go and reset. It really is a beautiful tradition. Honestly, it's taken me a long time to really understand it. But it really is about, the couple putting in something, really putting in refrain into the marriage, as a way to then both get something and both have space and then renewal. And this renewal comes with water and comes with very specific types of water. So it either needs to be in a natural body of water, or it needs to be, as I said, in this mikvah. And a mikvah is effectively a really deep pool that's connected to a rainwater basin. Now that's pretty specific. That's just not just any bathtub. So there are mikvaot, these ritual baths, attached to Jewish communities around the world. New York, Florida, Israel, India, everywhere, you name it. If there are Orthodox Jews there, there's a mikvah. And what was really interesting is that during COVID, all these questions came up about, can we use mikvah? How do we use mikvah? And then the people who were running these mikvahs were saying, well, can we stay open? If we don't stay open, what happens to couples? Do they literally not touch? Do they have to be indefinitely separated? How do we navigate this? And I know that mikvahs were added to essential services, which was incredibly, incredibly important for Jewish women and for Jewish families. And at the same time, they were permitted, and then that was kind of it. So women and the women who ran the mikvahs were left on their own to understand, how do we clean? How do we have people come? Is it safe for people to come in 5-minute increments? Do we need to wait half an hour? How do we clean? Do we need to use bleach? All these questions were left up to women to figure out by themselves. And there was just no support. So yes, on the one hand, there was permission granted, but then there wasn't the support, and it didn't exist. What's excellent is that, the community in many areas ad hoc, but they came together and they consulted doctors in their communities and all different sorts of public health experts to make their own decisions. And that was actually incredibly empowering for these women. So these moments of fear, these moments of we're being given this opportunity, but we're not being helped, was an incredibly difficult moment. It was also an incredibly difficult moment with people working from home, with kids from home, but it was empowering. Women were able to take this research into their own hands, and then in some cases, revert to rabbis and other male religious authorities who were then like either yes or no, but it was this empowering moment within that. And then Stephanie, as you mentioned, another example of this during COVID was the idea of the quorum of 10 men needed to have a prayer service in Jewish tradition. So as we know, during COVID, at certain points in New York, gatherings were limited to 10 people. Now, in Orthodox Judaism, there can be no ritual gathering without 10 men. Ergo, women were left out. Now, from the standpoint of religious liberty, it's excellent, right? That synagogues were able to, in some capacity, meet, that people were able to worship together and not alone. It's so important. But the effectively second-class citizens in religious society, in Orthodox Judaism, I would argue that's often women, right? They get the short end of the stick. I want to be mindful of my time. Great. I'd love to give you all one more example that I actually think is really important in the context of this conversation specifically, but it requires a bit of context. So we'll start with Instagram. What? Yes, I know. Recently, I would say in the last month or two, an Instagram trend has taken over Orthodox female Instagram, and it's surrounding the plight of the aguna, which in Jewish tradition is the idea of the chained woman. A chained woman is effectively, a woman becomes chained, I should say, effectively when her husband won't give her a get, which is a Jewish divorce contract. So the husband won't issue it. Now, in Judaism, there's actually no way in traditional Judaism to force a man to divorce his wife if she wants a divorce. So effectively, this is used for coercion, blackmail, manipulation, abuse. And women are then, in Jewish tradition, prohibited from obviously dating, getting married again, and they're chained. They're chained to this dead marriage. And there are some great organizations around the world, in New York, ORA, in the United Kingdom, Get Out UK. And these organizations are working on creating legal strategies outside of the religious structure, secular legal strategies, to free these women. And what's very difficult is that, in the last 100 years, I would say every great rabbi, not lawyer, not activist, but every great rabbi has truly grappled with this question of how can our religion allow for these chained women? How can it allow for this reality? Why is there no out? And there's not really a good answer, unfortunately, that I've ever seen. So some of these organizations that I mentioned have worked with rabbis to create what's called a halachic prenup, meaning a Jewish law prenup, so that my husband and I actually signed one. But it's for example, if a husband denies his wife a get, every day that he denies the get, he owes her $100. After 1 month, it increases to $1,000. And after 6 months, it increases to $10,000, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's the prenup we signed. But the point of that is that no, Jewish law can't do anything for the aguna, unfortunately. However, this binding legal prenup can. And there's a movement now to have Orthodox couples sign such a thing because it's a way to prevent this movement or this reality of the chained woman. So now back to Instagram. So in the last 2 months, there's been a massive push to kind of highlight men who are abusing their wives or presumably ex-wives in these ways to get them to give their wives the gets. And there's incredible pressure on social media. Now in newspapers, there are rallies outside of people's homes and places of work to try to have them give their wives these gets, these divorce documents, and it's actually been really successful. And this is another example of women coming to Jewish Orthodox women coming together. And, you know, it's from a place of desperation, I'm going to say it, but then becoming empowered and doing something about it and changing the conversation. I'll leave us there because I think I'm out of time, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel. That was fascinating, really, really powerful examples that you offered, and great examples at the end of the advocacy of the women on behalf of each other. So Mach, I'm going to turn to you next. And I know that in your role, you have such a rich perspective on the importance of advancing international religious freedom and the importance of programming and assistance to communities that have been targeted because of their faith. I'd love to hear your thoughts about ways in which lack of religious freedom protections for women internationally, like, what the stakes are for these women. In France, for example, where Muslim women have been prevented from wearing some religious garb in public, in some ways this has pushed some of these women to the fringes of society, pushed them out of the public square. In other contexts, because of a woman's religion, it's a matter of life and death for her. I'm thinking about Yazidi women or Uyghur women in China who are being targeted because of their religious beliefs. So can you speak a little bit to what is at stake for these women? And also, as a second question, sometimes we hear about there being a conflict between women's rights or women's empowerment and between religious liberty. And so can you just speak to, has that been your experience? And if not, how would you describe your experience with how religious liberty protections are important for women?
Thank you, Stephanie. Those are all important questions. Thank you for having me, and it's a real pleasure to be with such a great group of women in honor of Women's History Month. I would like to focus today on the state of international religious freedom stemming from my recent work at the U.S. Agency for International Development, what we call USAID, on this very important issue. During my work, this talk, I would like to touch on, as you mentioned, on some examples where the absence of basic religious liberty and the degrading of human dignity violated and still does women's freedoms of religion. Religious freedom is on the retreat across the world. Discrimination, harassment, repression, and of course persecution against communities of faith is getting much worse. Religious violence has risen to historic levels over the past decade, affecting nearly all religious groups. Believers of nearly all faiths, including Hindus, Buddhists, Yazidis, Christians, Muslims, and Jews, have increasingly persecuted over the past decade by state and non-state actors. Religious freedom, what we as Americans call our first freedom, is both a U.S. national security imperative and a universal human right. Regardless of party, U.S. presidents included advancing international religious freedom in their national security strategies because promoting religious freedom and pluralism helps nations maintain stability and prosperity. More stable and prosperous countries advance American economic and national security interests. The United States' unwavering stance to defend and promote religious liberty around the world is in its DNA, and it's vital for the world to follow suit and sends a strong message to people of faith that we are on their side. Now, you might ask, where is she going with all this, and where is the part that addressed women? As an immigrant to this country, and as a Muslim woman who focuses on the reprehensible attacks on religious freedom of communities of faith around the world, I'm constantly reminded of how fortunate I am to be living in America, a place where one can feel free to be themselves, no matter what their gender, religion, ethnicity, or creed. Women around the world continue to be eminent targets and victims of discrimination, repression, and genocide. Many face violence against them because of their gender or faith, or because of both. Authoritarian regimes like the Chinese Communist Party has made it a core function of their governance to persecute to persecute people of faith. The Chinese Communist Party is responsible for one of the worst human rights abuses in modern history. Their systematic acts of violence and sustained campaign of ethnic cleansing in the Xinjiang against the Muslim Uyghurs is a strong reminder of government-supported genocide, particularly against Uyghur women. Our conscience is shocked by the constant reports of the PRC's record of forced abortions, the killing of innocent and defenseless life, intrusive surgical birth prevention mechanisms, mass sterilizations, and other measures to systematically suppress birth rates and depress population growth. Women in China's, quote, re-education camps for Uyghurs have been systematically raped, sexually abused, and tortured. Last month, the BBC reported accounts of women, and I quote, removed from the cells every night and raped by one or more masked Chinese men. They said that they were tortured and later gang raped on their occasions, each time by 2 or 3 men. The international community, including the Muslim world, has been silent on these atrocities. However, the United States had completely a different position. Last January, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and the Trump administration declared that the Chinese government is committing genocide and crimes against humanity against the ethnic Uyghurs and other Muslims. The Biden administration has agreed. End of February, Canada, Netherlands followed suit, and still nothing from the Muslim world. Besides those being committed by the CCP, the genocide and crimes against Yazidi women require our attention and remembrance. In 2014, ISIS took control of large areas of Iraq and Syria where Christians and Yazidis have lived for centuries. Thousands of Yazidi women were taken as sex slaves. The United Nations estimated 7,000 Yazidi women and girls, some as young as 9, were enslaved and forcibly transferred to locations in Iraq and eastern Syria. Held in sexual slavery, survivors reported being repeatedly sold, gifted, or passed around among ISIS fighters. Estimates of more than 3,000 Yazidi women and girls are still missing today. Yazidi women who escaped ISIS captivity and who faced extreme violence live with severe mental health trauma and or social rejection by their communities. In 2017, USAID was in the lead to respond to the needs of the Yazidi and Christian communities and provide direct assistance to victims of ISIS genocide. Communities of faith who were targeted with heinous crimes because of their faith. Their people were killed or beheaded, their houses of worship were desecrated, and their women were enslaved and raped. During that time, I oversaw the agency's response in northern Iraq to provide assistance to these vulnerable communities who experience genocides. USAID, in partner with the State Department, has spent over $400 million to aid these communities, including food, shelter, drinking water, and medical care and psychosocial programs to victims of gender-based violence, as well as programs to support economic recovery, rehabilitate critical infrastructure, and promote justice and reconciliation. The United States government put a great emphasis to help these communities to return to their homes and communities from internally displaced camps. I was very proud of our work with Nadia Murad's initiative. Being in her gracious presence was incredibly humbling. Nadia Murad was awarded the Nobel Prize in 2017 for her tireless advocacy and work to end the use of sexual violence as a woman of war and armed conflict. She was kidnapped in 2014 from her hometown of Kodro and held by Islamic State for 3 months. But she was able to escape and continues to be a strong voice for her people. In 2019, USAID has also launched the new partnership initiative, which aims to expand our government's partnership on the ground with faith-based organizations and local organizations that have the credibility of their communities and who can help identify these essential needs. The initiative marked the first time that USAID directly worked with local groups in Iraq in nearly 20 years. Many of those groups were led by women, by Christians, by Kurds, by Yazidi, and all of those programs focused on job skills training, solar power installation, local organization capacity, and job creations. They're incredible group of women that took on their part despite the genocide and the experience that they went through to rebuild their communities. In June 2nd of 2020, President Trump signed an executive order that mandated religious freedom of all people worldwide in foreign policy, make it a priority of the United States, and the United States will respect and vigorously promote that freedom. This executive order mandated state and USAID to do an action plan to institutionalize all work that aims to building on existing programs designed to address systematic persecution and atrocities and promote interfaith dialogue and preserve cultural heritage. Societies that protect religious freedom, particularly those of women, are more likely to foster inclusive economic development, which is why promoting this freedom and USAID's development and humanitarian work will continue to be crucial to assist and empower communities of faith around the world where women are the center of the immediate needs. When governments suppress freedom of religion, they prevent entire segments of society, including women, from making meaningful contribution to their country's political and economic development. We empower countries to become more free, more prosperous, and more accountable to their citizens. And this includes supporting freedom of religion. Thank you.
Thank you, Sama. That was such a powerful reminder of what is at stake for many of these women across the globe, and some of the atrocities that they're facing and the important work that remains to be done. Kathleen, I'm going to turn to you next. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, speaking to some of your own heritage about empowering women of faith as a Catholic woman. And I'd also love to hear some more of your input about with the work that your organization does serving underserved population and providing educational opportunities for women and the families of those children. How does religious liberty relate to empowering women in that context? And before you answer, I'll just remind the audience that they should feel free to start sending in questions if they would like through the Q&A chat function, because after Kathleen's remarks, we're going to go ahead and turn to some Q&A. Thank you, Kathleen.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you so much, Stephanie, for having me here today. And it's a genuine honor and a pleasure to be talking about faith and feminism and religious liberty with a panel of amazing women. And I've been moved by the stories that every woman on the panel has shared so far. So, to the group, as Stephanie mentioned, I'm superintendent of Partnership Schools. We are a private school management organization that runs 9 urban Catholic schools, 7 in New York City and 2 in Cleveland, Ohio. And the importance of religious liberty to women's empowerment is a topic that is really very personal to me for a number of reasons. First, because my own understanding of women's empowerment was really shaped by the women who raised me, all of whom were fiercely independent, faith-filled, and devout Catholic women. And they were also stubborn feminists who didn't wait on society to grant them empowerment. They really just insisted on it. Both of my grandmothers were working women by necessity long before being a working woman was thought of as a form of self-empowerment. So one story that I've heard my parents talk about, and my dad in particular, was that in the 40s, it was against the rules of the preschool that one of my grandmothers wanted to send her children to for a mother to work. But of course, without working, she would not have been able to afford the tuition for her children to go to that school, and she was not going to be stopped. So my grandmother would pretend to have all the time in the world. When she dropped my dad off, she'd stand around and chat before clandestinely slipping away and dashing off to her job. And by today's standards, I feel like this quiet act of defiance, it might make her a hero of modern feminism, a woman who wouldn't comport with what the majority thought a woman should do, and she decided for herself whether to work and where to send her children to school. But she was really doing it for personal reasons. It was because she understood the importance of giving her children a strong start that Catholic education could provide. And my maternal grandmother made the same choice on behalf of my mom and her two sisters. And they still credit their Bronx Catholic school community for helping to lift them and their own family out of poverty. And that actually brings me to my second point. In my role as superintendent of a Catholic school management organization, I know and I see firsthand how educational opportunities are critical for empowering women. And in fact, the school that my mom and her sisters attended while they were living in the projects in the South Bronx, Immaculate Conception, is one of the 9 schools that I now have the honor of supporting and running. To give you a sense of who we are at the partnership, we serve 2,400 students who live in some of the poorest congressional districts in the country. In Cleveland, nearly 90% of the students we serve qualify for free and reduced price lunch. In New York City, nearly 2/3 do. In New York, 62% of our students are Latino. Many of them are non-native English speakers, and 34% are Black. In addition, while all of our families appreciate the character education and the values that a Catholic education provides, barely half of our New York City students are Catholic, and even fewer of our Cleveland students are. And sometimes people are curious when they hear that and they ask about it. And I always think about a quote that the late James Cardinal Hickey shared. He was the former Archbishop of Washington, D.C. And he once said, "We serve our students not because they are Catholic, but because we are." And so I'm really proud to work for an organization that has this strong legacy of faith-filled service. And I'm also really proud to stand on the shoulders of giants, most of whom were women who came before me. And I love the history of American Catholic education. And it really is a story of how women of faith have come together to selflessly support their communities and how they've come together to empower women and children through education. And I know, like, when most people think about parochial education, they think of a caricature of a nun standing in front of a classroom of dutiful school children. And the reason that caricature exists, it's drawn from the story of the women who founded and who have supported Catholic schools for generations. One of the most famous women was St. Catherine Drexel. So Catherine was a Philadelphia heiress who gave up her family fortune and founded the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament and dedicated her life to starting Catholic schools for Native American and Black children. And St. Catherine, she's got a really special place in our hearts at the partnership because she was the foundress of St. Mark the Evangelist, which is one of our Harlem schools. But this is the legacy on which Catholic education was built, and it's a legacy that really lives on through so many of the women who have made Catholic schools their home ever since. Last May, 3 of those women retired after teaching in our school communities for more than 40 years each. So these 3 women, Blanca Fred, Yvonne Coe, and Francine Rogers, they didn't talk about the work they did as women's empowerment, but they lived their lives as examples of what it means to empower others through faith-filled service. A colleague of mine, Beth Blaufest, she wrote a tribute to them, the 3 of them, when they retired last May. And in it, she explained the impact that these 3 women have had, not just on their students, though that is profound, but also on all of the men and women who have worked with them. And in one place, she explained the mission that their colleagues have internalized from these women is that sense of vocation. She explains that they came to the place that they taught in 1978, where when they would go in and teach during the day, people would steal the tires off their car while they were teaching, but they still showed up every day because for them, like for so many others, it's really more than a job. It's a deep and faithful call to service. And it's really because so many women have heeded that call that Catholic schools are able to continue that legacy of women's empowerment. And perhaps if you'll just indulge me, I'll share 2 more quick stories. One of our amazing 4th grade teachers, Jill Murray. She still teaches 4th grade at Sacred Heart in the Bronx. She's wonderful. If you get a chance to go to her classroom, you should definitely take her up on the opportunity. And she recently was telling the story of one of her former students she taught a number of years ago who came back to talk to her. And as she was telling the story, she burst into tears because she was so moved by it. And she said this young woman came back to let her know how much of a help she was to her. She wrote Miss Murray a poem, and Miss Murray still has it hanging on her wall. And in that poem, she said, "Miss Murray, I didn't know English, but you were accepting. You helped me to be better." And that young woman has now graduated from college and is becoming a nurse. And when Miss Murray was explaining this story, she said that this small act helped her realize that one small thing you do can have an impact on women and children that can last forever. And so a last story that I'll share with you is from a mom of two girls who actually are current students in one of our Harlem schools, Mount Carmel Holy Rosary. And she explained recently, she said, "People don't understand why when I have the choice of sending my daughters to the tuition-free school across the street, why wouldn't I take it?" She said, "But I have a friend whose child goes to that school and the poor thing is lost in the system. She's gotten left back twice. But my daughter is thriving and she's being exposed to an amazing curriculum and the opportunities that are coming her way. And it's just an amazing thing to have in our community." And so these stories, they move me and inspire me to my very core, because they underscore the point that without adequate educational opportunities, children, and especially young girls, really are at risk of being left behind. And so I feel like our schools at the partnership, like so many urban Catholic schools, they give students, they give young women the tools they need to find their own voice, to find their confidence, and to become a force for good in the world. All that said, I mean, I think Catholic schools are just one example in the ways in which religious liberty here in America can provide vital support and services to women. In fact, I know, Stephanie, you shared with me the statistic that really blew my mind, that 40% of the 50 largest charities in the US are faith-based. And these are charities that provide services that women in diverse communities rely on every single day. And so I know for me personally, when I think of women's empowerment, I feel like it's important to think not only about the individual choices that women make for themselves, but also in terms of the choices that they make for their children and for their communities. And I guess to me, the promise of religious liberty is the power it gives women to live their lives and with the values they believe in, and to shape a hopeful world, not just for themselves, but also for their children and their communities.
Thank you, Kathleen. Such a beautiful reminder of those generational impacts that empowering women can have, and the generational stories of your own family. And I also appreciate you drawing attention to the fact that when we're talking about ways in which liberty empower women, we're not just talking about religious rights of women themselves, but when we protect more of these sorts of religious charities and organizations, they can do work in this world that provides more choices and opportunities and empowerment for women. I'm going to turn the floor over to Kate so that she can ask a couple of questions that have come in, and I think we'll go in reverse order with those questions. So starting back with you, Kathleen.
Okay, we have a question from the audience about what is the position of the new administration on the religious persecution and atrocities, especially against the Yazidis and the other women. Is there a response to the persecution so far?
So for that question,
we should probably ask Sama.
Let's just do Sama, and then I'll jump in with some of the other questions that have come in.
Okay.
Question. My understanding is the programs continue to happen and take place. I was told that there was an announcement on some of more programs with the Yazidi communities in northern Iraq, particularly in the town that Nadia Murad came from. My hope is what happened during the Trump administration. Religious freedom and advancing religious freedom is a bipartisan issue. It's an American issue. You don't have to be a Republican or a Democrat in order to support that, right? The difference that we had during the Trump administration, that this issue was elevated into the foreign policy apparatus, meaning, what are we doing about it? We're not just writing reports or talking about it. We're actually telling the world that we are standing firm on this issue, whether it's religious freedom of Muslims, Christians, Yazidis, everyone, on top of utilizing and working with faith-based organizations. As far as USAID is concerned, until now, Ambassador Samantha Power is still being confirmed. She had her hearing a couple of days ago, but yet to be seen. She's a strong believer of human rights and helping victims of genocide. But I'm not sure, and I hope that the agency continues its leadership and continues its advocacy strongly the way we did it in the last 3.5 years, and make it a top priority for the work that we do overseas.
Thank you, Sama. Okay, so starting with Kathleen, then going to Sama and Rachel and Mona. I'm going to ask you a few questions that have come in, and you can focus on whichever you'd like, but these are somewhat related. So what's one thing each of you would suggest for the audience members that they can do to actualize some of these ideas and make them real in terms of empowering the lives of women as students and professionals and family members around them? Relatedly, how can women in different faith communities do more to advocate for each other, be better allies for empowering each other? And how can we make room for different perspectives and voices within the modern feminist movement? So starting with you, Kathleen, if you just want to take a few minutes, each of you, and share any thoughts you have about any of these questions.
Sure. I know the lens through which I view a lot of these questions is through the lens of education. And I do think that in the United States, there is something that we can all do to ensure that all women and all parents have the opportunity to educate their children in the values that they want and that they respect, and that's through the vehicle of school choice, which is always a really hot button issue. And there are lots of ways to get involved in that, both at the community level, at the state level, to promote policies and to be involved in community organizing and support groups that promote parent choice in education. Which again, when I think about the moms of the students we serve, like having that opportunity regardless of your income level, I think is really just critically important, and it's something that we can all do.
Sama, any thoughts on any of those questions?
I think from my perspective, look, I came to this country when I was 17 years old. I began my serious professional life immediately after 9/11. That was a very challenging time for me as a Muslim American. But I didn't sit in the corner and cried and whined that everyone is against me and don't understand my faith. I went and talked to Christian, Jews, other communities, evangelicals, because my assumption was people didn't know about me. First exposure to Islam, unfortunately, to majority of Americans was through the lens of either Hollywood movies where they show Arabs and Muslims only live in tents and ride camels, or through 9/11. People need to not assume what other people think of them. Look for ones, talk to them about different issues, commonality. Stephanie, you mentioned the burqa in France. I have serious challenges with the concept of burqa because as a Muslim, I don't believe it's a Muslim requirement, right? It's a Bedouin, it's a tribal thing that, for centuries existed in many parts of the Middle East or Muslim world. But there's nothing in the Quran or in the Hadith that requires women to cover their face. Yeah, the headscarf is a different story. However, for a government like France and come to enforce the freedom or limit the freedom of people to do, well, whether dress in short skirts or in burqa, that's a no for me. And this is why, to me, as an immigrant to this country, that doesn't exist here, right? So in terms of foreign policy and advocating religious freedom, please remember religious freedom overseas is not a Republican issue or a Democrat issue. And we have to talk about faith. Faith is part of it. It's not It's a human rights issue, but it's also a religious freedom issue. And we can't camouflage it under 3,000 layers because it sends a strong message when we call it as it is overseas, and empowers more people and hold their governments accountable for what their rights and duties towards their own citizens.
Rachel, any thoughts from you?
Sure, yeah. I want to address the question of how can different people of different faiths be better allies to one another, and women of different faiths be better allies to one another in this work and in this effort. From someone who's been working in the interfaith sphere for quite a few years now, I agree with Sama that I think dialogue is key and exposure is key. As a Jew, anti-Semitism is real. As a Jew who's worked in many different countries in the world, anti-Semitism is real. And the anti-Semitism can be dangerous, but a lot of the times it's just ignorance, right? Like, I've literally been told, oh, your nose isn't big. And I'm like, cool, thanks. Like, there's nothing else to say to that. But a lot of it is that people have never met a Jew before. So I have a good friend from Pakistan that I met at an interfaith conference in Germany 7 years ago now at this point. And he told me how, before attending this conference, he had never met a Jew before, despite the fact that he had also gone to university in Europe. He's like, maybe I did, and I just didn't know. And he told me that in Pakistan, there's an expression, and mind you, there is one Jew left in Pakistan, but there's an expression that means Jewish conspiracy, Yahudi sazish. And it's just what people say when things go wrong and they don't give it a second thought. And he really broke it down for me, and he explained to me like how crazy that is. He's like, we really haven't had a Jewish population in Pakistan for a long time, but it's just really steeped into the culture that, Jews have a lot of money, Jews control the world. A lot of these anti-Semitic tropes that, for better or for worse, have re-entered the discourse and seem normalized to a certain degree in the United States right now. This is not normal. This is not true. And speaking to Jews and meeting Jews and just hearing about what do Jews believe, like what are our holidays, what's school like, you realize that things aren't that different. People aren't that different. And I'm not saying that we're all the same, because everyone's not the same. People have different beliefs and practices, and that's okay. My father was born in Morocco, and in 2018, the Muslim Jewish Interfaith Coalition, my organization, ran an interfaith conference in Morocco, along with the Mcgee Association and the Foundation for Ethnic Understanding. And part of why we chose Morocco is because actually Morocco is, for all of the complications that exist in the country, Morocco is a place where differences are celebrated. It's, the Jew, the Amazigh, the Muslim, all of these ethnic groups, they know this is what makes up who we are. We're all different and we all love each other for being different. And there's separation, but there's integration. And for me, that's very reminiscent of old Spain that Jews often refer to in the time before the Inquisition, when Jews and Christians and Muslims and Roma and all sorts of people really lived in what Ibu Patel says is the most multicultural society up until the modern United States. And people worked at all different levels of society and contributed in all different ways. And they were driven by their values. Jose Faur, an academic who actually passed away, a Jewish academic who passed away last year, writes a lot about this. And about how people were just being, and that the reason that old Spain's multicultural society worked was because there was constant exposure and contribution. And I think ultimately coming back to empowerment and religious liberty, that's how we can do it. It's about, exposure and action, and just making sure that we're talking to each other and continuing to connect.
Thank you, Rachel. Mona, any thoughts about ways audience members can actualize some of the things that we've heard today, and how different women in different communities can do more to advocate for and empower each other and to make room for diverse voices from different women of faith in our society?
Yes. Well, as a member of the International Council of 13 Indigenous Grandmothers and our work that is global, through that, in meeting with the women who follow many traditions, as well as their religious practices and beliefs, there have been grandmother councils that have been established throughout the world. In Europe, there are a number of grandmother councils that have been established. The grandmothers in Africa and Gabon, Libreville, they've established their African Grandmothers Council, as well as Spain, the Czech Republic, the Netherlands. There's been these women who have taken the model of creating grandmothers councils, but also within those councils, embracing all other women. And through that, then they also are addressing issues like this, issues of regarding rights of women, and as well as their roles within their nations. So those are some of the things that have been taking place. We also have youth ambassadors who are also young people, young women who are stepping forward and participating actively to be present, and also to speak on behalf of the mission of human rights, environmental rights, religious rights. So I also participated in the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the 60th anniversary, where the religious leaders of the world came together, and we drafted a statement of that our religions and spiritual beliefs and practices are a human right. And that was quite an experience to sit at the table with all of these representatives of the world's religions and discussing this and discussing human rights. And it was the first time also that Indigenous people were at the table, being me as the representative, to include Indigenous spiritual practices and beliefs as a human right. So I'm really hopeful, and I know that we are making much headway in terms of women stepping forward and having a voice and making change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mona. We have one more question. What would you say is the single biggest obstacle that women of faith face to being empowered? And what is the most important thing that should be prioritized to overcome that obstacle? How about we start with Samat this time?
I'm sorry, Kate, could you repeat the question?
Sure. What would you say is the single biggest obstacle that women of faith face to being empowered? And what is the most important thing that should be prioritized to overcome that obstacle?
So I'm like Kathleen. I grew up in a very all girls home, and I also went to Catholic schools where nuns made sure that I speak my mind, even though they scared the hell out of me every day. But look, I mean, to me, my voice is the strongest voice. I don't want to wait for somebody else to come and give me my voice. I think from a Muslim perspective, I think there are a lot of work that Muslim women needs to do. The challenges is the Muslim world is not one size fits all. There are tribal constraints, there's economic constraints. Education is one of the biggest challenges for women of my faith, that we need more education. Catholic schools in the Middle East are one of the best schools. I'm a product of it. But hospitals, faith-based hospitals, Christian hospitals are also the best medical. I'm not a believer of what the government can do for us. I think citizens' freedoms and coming together and learning from each other is what brings people together. I was very fortunate that I came from, a good family and empowering parents. When my father passed away, my mom refused to marry us off as everybody in our family wanted us to do. And we're 4 girls. I have very strong family. So I think, and I try to do the same with my daughters. My husband is not Muslim, he's Christian. And we raise our children to celebrate Easter and to celebrate Ramadan. We have a Christmas tree and we have Eid. So I think, again, understanding each other's and the value that we bring. We're never going to all agree on who is Jesus and who's the real messenger, right? We all have our differences in how we're gonna, what is right and wrong. But I think at the end of the day, faith plays a really important role. As a mother, I want God in my kids' life so that when I'm not around, I know that they're not doing bad things. It's how do we go beyond the belief and the differences in that and see each other as human beings and as learning from each other, I think is very important moving forward.
Those are all really great points. Mona and Kathleen and Rachel, do you want to add to what you think are the biggest obstacles to women's empowerment? Mona, did you have any ideas or?
Well, I think that again, speaking from the grandmother's perspective, we believe now is the time. Now is the time for the women. In the indigenous beliefs and some of the prophecies, it said that there would be a time when the women would rise, the women would step forward and take the lead, and that that they would be, it would be our time. The men, they had their time, and this is going according to the traditional calendars and cycles that we follow, and that the time of the masculine, the cycle of the masculine has completed. Now we are in the lunar calendar, which is the time of the feminine. And so, that's what we're seeing. This is our time. The time is now to step forward and take the lead, and in all aspects of life. And so that's my my belief. I believe that we are empowered, we are strong, we have our voice, we can take our stand and make declarations. And when we make a declaration in our spiritual practices and belief, we make that declaration. That declaration is not only within our world here today, but it goes all the way up to the universe. it becomes part of the natural law, and we stand behind that. So that is what I believe we're seeing now. It's happening.
Well, that is fantastic news. I'm right there with you. Kathleen, would you like to go next, and then Rachel?
Sure. I definitely want to answer with deep humility, because I don't know what the single biggest threat is for sure. I think that when I think about the topic we're discussing today, with the intersection of women's empowerment and religious liberty, and particularly thinking about it through the lens of what we see here in the United States, I know that one threat is the, I guess the way I would put it is maybe the increasing sort of secularization of society, which I do feel like is pushing faith to the sidelines. And so I worry, what I love about the discussion today is we're talking about women's empowerment and faith together, because they can be complements to each other. They aren't always, but they can be. And I think that too often in modern times, it feels like you're either talking about faith or you're talking about women's empowerment. And I think that talking about the two together is really important.
I really agree with most of the things that have been said. So thank you all. I'll just add that I think empowerment to me means choice. And I think defining that is really important. And that definition really reminds me of the Jewish heroine Esther from the Purim story. I learned this from a teacher of mine, Barbara Spector. I just want to quote her by name. She talks a lot about how the Purim story is the one story in the Jewish calendar where we really don't mention God. God's presence isn't there at all. And there's a big question in Jewish thought, why not? And where is God? And what we end up learning from this entire process is that really God is in the providence. And where is the providence in the story? It's in Esther. Esther takes action, and then the chips fall as they do. And the chips falling as they do is God, right? Because God created the system. But it's Esther's action. It's Esther's small choices on the day-to-day, which amount to huge choices, which truly empower her. And ultimately, at the end of the story, she saves the Jewish people from genocide. And I just think that's such an important point to bring here, that to empower women, to empower religious women, there needs to be an understanding that there is choice. And I just wanted to add that to everything else that's already been said.
This was all so powerful. I have chills, and I'm just so inspired by this incredible group of women and your thoughts and your wisdom about these issues. Thank you for being such an example to all of us and bringing more attention to this important topic. We are out of time, so we will give a virtual round of applause as we do in the weird Zoom world we're all in, to all of you for these great remarks and insights you have shared. Thank you for being part of this important interfaith dialogue. As a reminder to our audience, if you want to follow future events like this that we'll have with Notre Dame's Religious Liberty Initiative, you can follow us on Twitter. The handle is @IndyLawRLI. You can also follow the Notre Dame Law School Religious Liberty Initiative on Facebook. So thanks again to Kate for helping moderate the discussion, and to all of our fantastic panelists. And hope you all have a great rest of the International Women's History Month.
Thank you. Nice meeting all of you.
Thank you all.